Welcome aboard, ladies and gentlemen, to our episode 5 of African Real Estate Podcast. And here it's all about exploring the dynamics of real estate. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to look at a very interesting topic. But before we introduce the topic, I will be your host, Dominic Mwangi, alongside
Victor Kiplagat, your favorite co-host for African Real Estate Podcast.
Guys, and before we proceed, I would also like to thank you so much for your continued support. You have been there since episode 1, episode 2, and now we are at episode 5. It's a pleasure always having you back to our podcast.
Yeah, we appreciate you guys.
And now to our topic today, we are looking at the high-rise buildings, advantages and the disadvantages of high-rise buildings. You will agree with me that today there is a spike in the number of high-rise buildings. Majority of the developments, especially in urban areas, are of tall buildings. They are utilizing the vertical space on the scarce or limited horizontal space. A high-rise building is any building, whether residential or commercial, that has at least 70 to 75 feet, approximately above 23 meters high. That qualifies to be a high-rise building. These can also be approximated to be a 7-story building. Sometimes they are referred to as skyscrapers. They are on the rise because of the increasing population, especially in urban areas, having in mind that land is limited. The land that this population has to be settled on, the land is limited. And as we looked at it in our episode 4, we talked about scarcity. So you find that when I have a quarter an acre of a land, I will prefer building a high-rise rather than building 7 buildings on the horizontal.
All right. From the word high-rise, they are rising.
Exactly. They are utilizing the vertical space.
Okay.
Some very few quick facts. In the world, the tallest building is Burj Khalifa, and it is 829 meters.
Interesting.
In Kenya, there was an expectation that there will be a building by the name Pinnacle Tower. The project was there. The excavation was done. It was approximated to be 320 meters on the ground. However, there is no progress over the same project. Then later, there are lack of funds.
White Elephant Project.
We could say that. And it was also expected to be the tallest building across Africa, because currently the tallest building is in South Africa, but it hasn't gone as far as 320 meters. But today, currently now, the tallest building in Kenya is none other than the Britam Towers that stands on a height of 200 meters. We will definitely go directly into the advantages of these high-rise buildings.
Right. It has the use of white space in dense cities. When I say white space, I mean the negative space, whereby you find that you can have like the balconies or the viewership to different buildings across the different areas that you see. There are different skyscrapers. Under this white space, they create a breathing room for people to move, to live, to work, to play. It has an ample smart space and planning. I mean, this white space ensures that even in dense cities, there's space for moving, living, working, playing, parking. It is not really clustered per se in terms of negative space that has a crumbled space. It creates space in a very wonderful and positive way.
Right. Can also link that to there is efficient space utilization. Skyscrapers tend to utilize the vertical. They maximize on the vertical on the land that is horizontally limited. So this helps in saving space as well as cost.
Exactly. Just to a point to relate to what you're saying, sustainability. It reduces consumer waste of space as people will own less when storage is limited. In that, with sustainable living, this ensures that in these high-rise buildings, they are compact urban living. Because it's built like in a high-rise, as we've mentioned from the definition, the compactness of urban living will ensure sustainability of space, of buildings, of parking, of the playing area, so that every space will be utilized to a maximum in a way that it's sustainable to living. The way you can find a negative space Have you seen it, Dominic? A negative space whereby you find it's a dumping site, or a
Sure.
negative space whereby you find that it's a car junkyard, it's just an idle space. But in high rise, the positive and negative spaces are used to the maximum because your storage is limited.
Right. We can also tend to link that with the utilization of shared amenities. For example, in a city like Nairobi, you find that the law that is there dictates that for every high-rise building, there should be a common playground for the people who are utilizing that high-rise building. If there are hospitals, occupants of the high-rise will have to use that hospital. They will not have to build maybe an extra hospital. Similarly, schools, playgrounds, shopping malls, they utilize these facilities without the need of coming up with more.
In another way, we consider the skyscraper, it addresses housing shortage, especially in densely populated locations, because you find that a high-rise building can house many rental apartments, many commercial buildings. It houses people who have moved from rural areas to urban centers.
I agree. You also find that currently the government is dealing with affordable housing, something that we will look at in the subsequent episodes. Affordable housing projects, they are utilizing the vertical space. So majority of them are high-rise buildings.
Wow. Very interesting, I think, to consider. We have these magnificent touristic views of sunsets or sunrise that provide inhabitants with those eye-catching views to savor and ponder with a look while you are unwinding after a long day at work. Any good view from a high-rise building is soothing to the soul and pleasing to the eyes, to say the least.
Sure. You find that, for example, there are buildings that have spaces, the rooftops, balcony, specifically for viewing the scenery. So
Yes.
you find this might in return promote tourism.
Right.
High-rise buildings, they lead to growth of surrounding infrastructure.
Yes.
When a building comes up, if it's a residential building, people will need roads, people will need water, people will need sewer system to stay in a particular place. There comes development out of a high-rise.
All right. This skyscraper and high-rise buildings, they offer urban identification of towns. The way in like Dubai or Germany or Spain, when you visit those countries, you might see these tallest buildings and they are source of pride.
An amazing point there. You can also talk about safety and security. If a high-rise building meets the set safety standards, the tenants in the property have reduced threats of attacks and insecurity. For example, you find that majority of these high-rise buildings are in gated communities. There is a limited entry and exit. So whoever gets into the estate is known. Whoever leaves is known. So there will be limited cases of insecurity.
Sure. Advantages of skyscraper. These high-rise buildings, they offer isolation of people from ground level interaction. If someone is at a first floor and the other person who's in this very top building of the high-rise is in a 200th floor or a 90th floor, you see that level of interaction is already broken from the word go. So,
Sure.
Unless, of course, maybe they are communicating via phone,
Sure.
the high-rise buildings have, in a way, isolated people from ground level interaction, whereby someone, the way someone from first floor and second floor could communicate is very different from someone who is in a first floor and someone who is in a 50th floor could communicate. It could even the passing of message could face some drawbacks.
Sure, they possibly even don't know each other. Why should they communicate? So this has brought about, I agree, brought about the isolation.
Yes.
High-rise buildings have also strained some public facilities and amenities. For example, you find that, let's take an example. The sewer system that is operating in areas of Nairobi, as well as the water system, it was constructed a long time ago. By then, maybe they hadn't envisioned the tall buildings that will have a lot of people on a small space. A high-rise building, let's say 47 floors, needs to be connected to the already existing sewer system, already existing water system. The existing facilities are really strained, a thing that has brought water shortage in the urban centers, as well as strained sewer systems.
True. These high-rise buildings may overshadow, in a way, the historical buildings that were once iconic, a source of memorial inspiration or cultural identification, because you find that these high-rise buildings, they overshadow the historic building. People look at the historic buildings from a point of, this one has lost its taste, its culture, and its tradition. If the historic building was iconic, you're exchanging what was iconic for what was modern.
I agree. The high-rise buildings have also brought congestion. They increase the population of a place by a big number because we agree you will find a high-rise building, for example, having 47 floors, and each floor has, let's say, at least 8 rooms. 8 tenants, you multiply by 47. So all these people are getting into a small space. They have cars, they utilize different means of transport, will bring around traffic congestion.
Exactly. Just to borrow from your point of congestion, you can imagine a fire has occurred at maybe the 50th floor or the 200th floor. In case of fire, in such situations, it can be difficult to evacuate people from this high-rise building. It's a very confusing situation. Everyone tries to run for their lives, literally, to save their children. And in a fire scenario, if it is not well contained, the safety measures, a lot of casualties can occur. It's going to be very difficult to evacuate people if there's a stampede.
Exactly. We can also link this to these buildings can promote a breach of security. For example, I saw a particular image, a very recent image. It was taken at State House. The president was having a meeting with somebody. The photographer happened to take an image where the background, you can see the tallest building in the city, that is Britam Towers. It came to my thought, what about terrorism? Maybe a terrorist can go to the top of the Britam Towers and take advantage of, I can see the State House, I can see the president. The high-rise buildings, I think they should also consider, in as much as they want to accommodate people, they should consider the security issue they are exposing people to.
Exactly. And also because of the structural appearance, the architectural appearance of these high-rise buildings, their location, the different compartments of the different high-rise buildings are built to the standard, they are quite pricey compared to any other building. These high-rise buildings, you're having the best of the latest in technology in terms of construction, in terms of maintenance, in terms of amenities like elevator or escalator. It means that they are pricey, and even price out those people who just want to afford a decent, for lack of a better word, a decent living.
All right, in as much as they are expensive, remember we are all in business to make profits. So exactly. I have constructed a high-rise building, incurred a lot of cost. So these costs will definitely trickle down to this person who wants to stay in my high-rise building. So I agree, it becomes expensive.
Right. In case of an earthquake, the high-rise building will be prone to a lot of damage. In case of calamities that are natural, even floods can affect the high-rise buildings if in construction of these proper safety measures were not put into place. No one constructs a high-rise building with the mind that in 5 years' time or 10 years' time an earthquake will happen. So what will I do? People always have this assumption, and I don't blame them. This assumption that we are safe in this high-rise building of ours, nothing will happen. The point of business is to make money, but also importantly to ensure safety first. The safety issue is that it's a thin line, because in safety you might tell someone that this is an earthquake-prone area. How many clients will you have? I mean, if it's only the caretaker who will remain because his job is only tied there.
I agree. So you also find that these high-rise buildings, they pose a threat to the environment. Before these high-rise buildings are erected in a place, you will find that whether they are buildings or not, there are plants that are existing. There is vegetation on this piece of land. But when the high-rise buildings are brought up, the place is full of concrete. Plants are destroyed. However, the law calls for some place for greening on these high-rise buildings, but you'll find this law is not adhered to. It poses a threat to the environment.
What are some of the maintenance aspects that they can engage in to ensure that these high-rise buildings are of safety? Number one, should ensure that the walls, the doors, and the windows, for example, the walls, ensure that any crack has been dealt with in time, ensure that the doors are locked properly, ensure that the windows, they are closed very well.
Agree.
Also ensure that the fire suppression system works well, the fire alarm system works well. In case of a fire, you ensure that there's a great assembly point. During times of fire, people should not use the lift. Also ensure that the ventilation is well catered for, because you can imagine if a ventilation is not well catered for in times of fire, then lives can be lost because of the low levels of oxygen.
Sure.
You should also ensure that you have quality heat resistance, so that it becomes good protection against heat and cold. Because you'll agree with me, Dominic, once someone is living maybe the 200th floor or 250th floor, the conditions of the weather cannot be same as someone who's living on the ground floor.
Sure.
The heat resistance systems and measures are not put into place, and someone collapses or faints, it can cause some problems to their health. Also ensure that storage of water is well catered for.
Sure.
It would be a travesty, and it would also be really bad if someone has to move from 50th floor to 47th floor to use a Wi-Fi.
Sure.
And the Wi-Fi can still be on the same floor.
I agree.
Also, the escalators and the elevators should be working properly. It's not a good idea that someone should do a steps of 200 staircases or 100 to reach their destination, while escalators and elevators are there to ensure smooth movement. And in case of a fire, the smoke detectors should always detect the smallest range of potential fires. And the essence of safety in these high-rise buildings is that no life is lost, even during tragedies such as fires.
Exactly.
The final point about maintenance of these high-rise buildings, home inspection.
I agree and I concur that inspections should be very regular, so that if a problem came up yesterday, it is solved with ease and almost immediately.
Yes.
So that is it for today, ladies and gentlemen. Now, if you want to invest, if you want to live in high-rise buildings, at least you know what high-rise buildings are. You know the pros as well as the cons of high-rise buildings. Thank you so much for keeping us company, and I hope you learned something or two.
I hope our dear listeners will not be afraid of living in these high-rise buildings because of the disadvantages. I mean, every advantage with a disadvantage, it also means there's also an aspect of adventure. Imagine being on the top of a 200th floor and having that to restrict you. If you're living in a wonderful space and all the safety measures have been put into place, there's no need to worry.
So that has been our episode 5 of African Real Estate Podcast. And as always, we remind you that this podcast, it's always about exploring the dynamics of real estates. So today, ladies and gentlemen, I have been your host, Dominic Mwangi, alongside
Victor Kiplagat, the co-host of African Real Estate Podcast.
And until next time, see you in episode 6. Bye.
Goodbye. Have a wonderful time.